Snow came on a slant, fine as ground salt, and the wall took it without noticing. The ice's blue heart did not feel whether the way men did. It did not shiver. It did not curse the wind. It listened. In the yards below, what men called silence was a quiet laid atop many sounds. The grumble of kettles, the clack of practiced swords, chains knocking against flagstones when the gusts grew spiteful. Ghost watched the flakes catch in the torch glow. Jaws parted to taste the cold. John could feel the wolf's alertness like a pull along his spine. He stood in the commander's tower with the leather of a fresh-sewn glove squeaking under his thumb. The pink-stained letter spread on the table. It smelled of bad wax and sheep fat, and it stank of lies. He had held it too many times. Every reading made his pulse drum in the hollow along his throat. A drum that had the rhythm of the vow he had sworn and the other oath. The one the blood inside him wanted to swear over again to a house not his by law. He closed his eyes until the surge ebbed. When he opened them, the letter was still there, and the wind's voice at the shutters was no gentler. Satin came without knocking, hair wet from the snow. "Bowen Marsh is waiting, my lord. So is the builder." The Queen's men sent word as well. They want to be obeyed," John said. The glove squeaked again. "Bring them to the shield hall, and send for Dolorous Ed. And Leathers." Satin hesitated. "Ghost as well." "Ghost will come if he must," John said. Ghost would come to any cry of danger and many of sorrow. The dire wolf pushed his nose under John's hand, and the cold that clung to Ghost's fur told John the door had stood open. The wolf came and went as he pleased, like a lord. "Not you, though," he said to Satin, and allowed himself a little smile when Satin muttered about the unfairness of dire wolves in general and Ghost in particular. The boy's cheer always came with gloom on its back. It was like standing between two panes of cold glass and watching a sun transit. In the shield hall the torches were fat and sullen, and smoke curled up to stain the beams. Bowen Marsh stood with his pale, pained face turned toward the fire. Othel Yarwick scowled at the straw-littered floor as if the stones had betrayed him. Queen Celis' men were colder than the weather, every button and belt polished, every eye appraising the room as if it were a battlefield that could be taken by order. They were not allowed swords in the hall. They resented that, and if a man resented being disarmed, he should not come as a guest. "You have my thanks," John began, voice mild enough to surprise himself. He was tired of the letter and tired of feeling his heart torn in two, and tired of the sound of his own anger. "We have a great deal to do and no time to do it. We have a great deal to undo," Bowen Marsh said. His mouth pinched around the word until it almost broke. "Wildlings in our halls, wildlings at our gates, wildlings wearing black cloaks and pretending the old words mean something to them. Pretending is a slippery charge for a man to make about another man's heart," John said. "You are first steward, Bowen. There is no meat for pretense in your duties. If you would have us fed and clad and our fires lit through the end of all winters, you will count the barley and salt pork and wool, and you will not count up the sins of men whose backs you have never seen in a snowstorm." Bowen's hands trembled. "You would shame me, then, before the Queen's men. I would relieve you of the burden of being the loudest voice in every room," John said. He turned to Othel Yarwick. "What does the builder say?" Othel's eyes slid toward the Queen's men and away again. His voice would have been a growl anywhere else. Here it was careful. "Rhymegate and Sable Hall stand. Icemark will stand once the roofs are set. I need more hands if you want Queen's Gate ready before the worst of the season." "And the thens," Bowen said. "Shall we put bronze-helmed cannibals in charge of our stones?" Leathers snorted from behind John. When Leathers snorted, men tended to remember that Leathers had once been a thing to frighten children with. Leathers would have eaten fewer children than hunger did. "We will put men who can build in charge of building," John said. "Leathers trained 24 to work the creaking and lifts. Yarwick needs another score with spines still good. The free folk have those. Men who carried antlers and whale bones farther than anything we've hauled since Aegon's day. They have women who can carry as well. We will take anyone who will stand the cold and the rules, and we will feed them because it is prudent, not because we weep. If the wall is to hold, it must be manned. We have more wall than wall. Queen Celis was not present, but 2 of her knights were, faces as narrow and shining as their sword edges. Ser Patrek of King's Mountain, a thin-lipped man in a blue cloak embroidered with stars, tapped a finger against his own vambrace. Her Grace will have words on placing her men where they may be of use. She will have them with me, John said. I will hear counsel. I will not be ruled from a tower that does not know what the yard looks like at midnight. The order of this place is clear and old as the ice. Her Grace has been welcomed as a guest. Guests do not command the watch. He felt his temper flare then, the way a spark flares when a stick is poked, and he saw in Ser Patrek's eyes that the spark had shone. Perhaps it was well that it had. Queen Celis' men were used to seeing men bend like green wood. Black brothers did not bend, not well, and if they broke it did not make for easy kindling. We'll have the Lord Commander's plan then, Yarwick said, impatient because impatience was his refuge against storms. The letter says Bolton holds Winterfell. The letter claims more than that. The letter is a child's ransom note written in pig's blood, John said. He wants me and you're wise enough to ride out, and he knows how to aim a knife. He speaks of my sister. He speaks of my name. He paused only once before speaking the next thing. He lies, or he thinks he lies. We do not know. What we know is this: hundreds wait at Hardhome. Cotter Pike's last raven was all ice and panic, but in the panic was a simple thing. Come soon or do not come at all. If there is a place for anger, it is there. Hardhome, Bowen whispered, as if naming a ghost called it into the room. It is a trap. It might be, John said, but it is also a promise. Those people will come to us starving, or they will come to us as dead things. The latter are harder to feed. Melisandre was standing in the archway then, no more sound than frost, hair red enough to shame the fire. Men drew in their breath without knowing why. Her eyes made one think of a hearth one did not want to warm one's hands at for too long, lest the flame notice. The cold lords gather on the shore, she said. I see the white of them when I sleep. I see the shadows they make inside men. Do not go to Hardhome yourself. Send others. Who would you send? John asked. She smiled, soft as a knife laid along a throat. Anyone whose death you can bear. Ghost's hackles bristled. John placed a hand on the wolf's neck. The fur wrote the weather along his palm. Tormund Giantsbane will go. He knows those coasts better than any of us. He will take 5 ships. He will go and come back with as many as can stand, and as many that can't as can be carried. Cotter Pike will have a voice in the choosing. Send word to Eastwatch. He turned to Leathers. Choose 2 score to go with them. The women who want to go will go, and those who would rather not will be set to carrying stones for Othel. Take the men who are not so foolish that they will think the sea's edge is the end of the world. Bowen's mouth had the look of a man at the edge of a privy pit. You put our fate in the hands of raiders, Lord Commander. I put our fate in any hands that can hold, John said. Ghost's heartbeat flared in his chest. If I fall to choosing men whose oaths were written on parchment over men whose only oath is hunger and terror, then I deserve to be frozen to that pink letter and left as a lesson. The meeting dissolved like frost blown from a window when the kitchen boys threw open the shutters. The weather had changed in the space of an hour, the fine salt now big wet flakes that stuck to beards and swords equally. Men ran toward the yards because men always ran toward bad news and fire. John let the others scrape by him in the arch and stood aside when one weg one dar one ducked the lintel, the giant's breath steaming like a stable of horses. One had taken to the hall since the day John had put a stop to a dozen Queen's men prodding him with spears to see if a giant bled red the way a story said they bled. The giant's feet made the straw cry out when he walked. Ghost followed in the wake of that stride as if the giant made a wind. Ser Patrek, someone cried in the yard. Ser Patrek, he means to. Ser Patrek had drawn a dagger in honor of his disarmed state. He did not point it at the giant. He pointed it at John, the dagger an idea, not a threat. He knew no steel could take one quick enough and live. You humiliate us, he said. You forget yourself before her grace. John did not reach for his sword. Ghost stood on paws small as dinner plates compared to one's feet. But after a time of living under the same roof, men learned a size was no measure of danger. "Put the blade away," John said. "You do not frighten me. You will only frighten yourself when you see what the consequences here for drawing steel in a hall where steel is forbidden." "By whom?" Ser Patrek sneered. "By a boy with a wolf?" One picked Ser Patrek up by his blue cloak and shook him as if he were a stubborn rug. Bones made a weakness noise. The dagger hit the ground and bounced. The giant's fingers closed by mistake where a man's ribs were. A star on Ser Patrek's cloak tore loose and jangled on the floor, bright and foolish looking. The sound men made when they realized they were about to die betrayed all their gods. Ser Patrek made such a sound. One's hand clenched, then loosened. Slow as a thaw, he set the knight down. Ser Patrek landed with more pride than grace, scrambled for the dagger, and found Ghost's paw on it. The direwolf's eyes were a red that did not belong to any hearth. "We do not kill guests," John said. The words came through the ice over his teeth. "We turn them out. We count them out to the yard. We count them in if they return humble. But we do not kill them. Not here." One made a noise from deep in his chest like a drum underwater. It might have been a word. It might have been hunger. John put a hand to the giant's knuckles. "We are not animals who play with food," he said, mostly to the room. "We are not bits in a song that ends with a chorus of corpses. If the Queen's men wish to sing of honor, they may do so somewhere else tonight. Ser Patrek, you will be lodged in the old keep. Unpack nothing. Unpack your pride most of all." Ser Patrek left with a face like a mask fitted hasty and wrong. The yard's cold came back in. John could hear his own breath under the rest of the night. When the bell rang once for supper and twice for a message, John found Clydas at the rookery with a raven biting at his glove and making a satisfied caw, as if mischief had a place in the cold. "East watch," Clydas wheezed, while the next raven sidled and regarded John out of one blunt little eye. "Cotter Pike says they've seen fires across the Bay of Seals at night, moving like a line of torches that do not burn down. He says the wind is wrong. He says if we send ships, send them now, and if we cannot, shut our eyes. He says to send cloth. He says to send pots. He says to send anything that floats." "Send him 5 ships," John said. "The Blackbird, the Noble Lady, the Priscilla, the Goodheart, the Talon. The rest will be cocked straight through morning, and not a man on any crew will sleep on dry straw until the seams are happier than I am. Tell him Tormund will command the landing, and it will either be a rescue or a tale. Tell him to choose. And you?" Clydas's eyes were run through with veins so fine and fierce it seemed a breeze might snap them. "I will stay and I will watch from here," John said, and the words tasted like something he had promised to a dead man. "I will be Lord Commander in truth, not in the songs that are sung after. Ghost and I will walk the top of the wall. We will see what sees us back." That night the wind fell away for an hour, an unheard of mercy, and in the silence John stood on the ice and thought of a boy and a girl chasing each other through Winterfell's lichyard, snow squeaking under their boots, the happiness bright and uncomplicated and entirely doomed. He had not understood then that nothing good endured. He knew it too well now. Ghost ranged ahead, white upon white, a thing the night itself might have made out of frost. The torches along the causeway burned like a broken necklace dropped across the snowfields. Far to the east, the sky was an iron lid without color. For a while he let himself imagine what it would have been if he had ridden south, if he had taken a handful of men and smashed them against the gates of his childhood to say that his childhood would not be stolen without a cry. He let himself imagine until his jaw ached. Then he forced himself to release it into the air and watched it climb like steam and vanish. At dawn, Tormund came to the yard dressed in furs that had seen more campfires than most men saw mornings. He smelled of wood smoke and horses and the sort of laughter that got a man killed on the wrong side of a line. "Snow," he boomed, as if it were a name he liked to say but would not ask permission to use. "Are you coming to the sea with us?" "No," John said. "The wall needs commanding. It needs someone to share jokes with Bowen Marsh." Tormund spat. His saliva made a hole in the snow and then froze into a little bead of surprise. "The sea won't like that. It'll think I bring it my second. Bring it my best, John said. Bring me back my sorriest. Tormund gripped his forearm. I'll bring you back some thanks as well, if I can find any. The dead keep all the best thanks. They sailed under a sky that could not decide whether to snow or merely to watch men freeze. The 5 ships looked like toys placed at the edge of the world for a cruel boy's amusement. John watched them from the tower, and each time one ship's dark belly met a white back of water, he felt it in his own ribs. He stood until the east swallowed them. Ghost pressed his flank against John's knee until John looked down and remembered his body. In those days, the wall felt like a monastery that had been built on a volcano that had been built on a grave. Men moved quietly. Voices were careful. The laugh that broke out too loud did not live long. The Queen's men kept their own table and their own prayers. Leathers trained men to use bows and spears who had grown up with clubs and bone knives, and he did it without shouting. That was the miracle in it. Yarwick's crew slung shingles onto Queen's Gate and stamped their feet and argued about whether to thatch the newest of the roofs with rushes or seagrass. Bowen Marsh counted and counted again. John made him count for himself with his own sore hands, and some of the meanness worked out of his voice with the arithmetic. Shireen Baratheon came to John once in the rookery, a book folded to her chest. She watched the ravens with wonder that had not yet learned to be suspicious of the world. My maester says it is wicked to keep birds who do not want to be kept. Your maester is right, John said. But birds are wise. They consider their wickedness bargains. The ravens want a warm place and meat to tear. They pay for it. They pay in messages men would kill each other to read. They should be smarter. They should go and live on a cliff somewhere. But they don't. She nodded with solemn gravity, as if this were a lesson about how people were to be, not about birds. I am reading of dragons, she told him. When they are born, people say the air grows warmer for miles. Do you think the air would be warm if a dragon came here? Would it melt the wall? She had a piece of slate on her face where the maester had tried to smooth the worst of the scar's edges. John crouched, so his eyes and hers might be level. I think dragons' heat is for men's stories. I think if all the dragons in the world were born a dozen times, this wall would still stand higher than their smoke. It was laid with something more patient than fire. Magic, she whispered. She was a little girl with a little girl's belief in magic and a woman's knowledge of what cruelty magic could license in the hearts of the pious. John did not say the word. He let his silence say it for him, and the ravens flapped and clicked their beaks, and one bird cried out a word that was not a word at all, and Shireen looked at it as if it had asked her a secret question. 2 days later, a horn blew once at dawn from atop the wall, then thrice before the breath had finished rising in men's chests. Every man who had learned the sound felt it in his bladder first. The air went thin around them, and even the Queen's men, who were brave in ways that had little to do with whites, moved too quickly. On the eastern height, the ranger whose face was always red as if the wind had slapped him there turned the horn over in his hands as if certain it had grown fangs. I saw them, he told John, when John came at a run that was not yet quite a run. They were far. The light is poor, Lord. Smoke where there should not be smoke, and men moving where the shore is a map of rocks. Shadows, Melisandre said. Snow makes tricks with shadows. The horn ma. Tess no tricks, John said. He squinted along the flat line where the world ended. He saw nothing. Sometimes he wished for a glass as good as those the lords of the far south used for watching tournaments. Men here watched the end of days with eyes that watered in the cold and thought themselves fortunate to make sense of a line of pins marching. He stood there until the cold took the feeling from his ankles and his jaw, and until the men began to look at him as if he were a statue. Watch, he told them. Call when you see. Call for practice until your voices crack. If the dead come today, they will not do so to a song we know, but they will come when the practice is least in our throats. The next day, a raven came from Eastwatch with a message that looked like a waste rag after a butcher. Cotter Pike had written as if he wanted to get the letters off his fingers. John read, wind, cliffs, dead things on the shore, torches that did not burn down, children whose breath made no steam. He read, Tormund's name twice, once with a curse and once with something like respect. He read, "Boats swarmed, 2 broken. 1 used to smash skulls in a pinch. 1 returned to Eastwatch with 5 men aboard clinging like snails. 1 swimming behind because a boy had tied it to his wrist." He read, "We cannot hold much longer if they press." And the scratch where the pen had bitten and broken when Pike had pressed too hard. "Bring heat," John said. "Bring pitch. Bring every bolt we have. Bring men out of bed and out of pride. Make a line of fire. Othel, how many kegs?" "Enough to burn the kitchens," Yarwick said. "But if you take them, we will have no light under the roofs, and the men will curse you until spring." "I will take them and let them curse me the rest of my life," John said. "We will build new roofs in the dark." He did not ride to Eastwatch. He wanted to. He wanted to live inside the wanting the way a man wants to live inside a fir in a gale. Instead he ordered and counted and said names. Satin looked at him with eyes too eager for this weather. "You should be there," Satin said. "Your sword, Longclaw." "Longclaw will learn to wait," John said. He placed the wolf-head pommel against his palm and felt his father's hand there, the one that had given the sword. "Sometimes a sword is a man you send. Today that man is not me." When the ships came back up the coast over empty water that tried to pretend it was stone, John saw from the top of the wall what men below could not. The pattern of how the boats moved, the way they leaned into wind that should have come a different way, the way 3 of the 5 gave the dead shore longer looks than a living shore deserved. He saw a little boat no bigger than a house's bed hauled behind one ship like a child dragged by a parent in a crowded market. He turned then and took the stairs 4 at a time, and Ghost flowed beside him as if he were a shadow of ice. He was in the yard when the first ship eased against the quay. Men with hooks and poles shouted and slipped and swore. Women with children pressed to their ribs screamed prayers to gods who had never seen a sea. Tormund's voice rose among the din like a bull's bellow under a slaughterhouse roof. "Back, you goats, back! Let the ones with legs weaker than yours move first," he shouted. "The sea is not asleep. It watches. Don't let it see any of you it will want to dream about later." His beard had icicles threaded in it like beads. In the crush, a girl with hair matted to her skull with salt and grief looked up at John with gray eyes that struck him like stone. For an instant he could not breathe. Ghost pressed against him, and his chest remembered air. He looked again. The girl's face had none of Arya in it, not truly. There was a wrongness to the mouth, a different shape to the brow. And still his heart made a mistake and expanded, as if he had seen his own life return to him wearing a different dress. "Where is Cotter Pike?" he said to Tormund when they wrestled brief order out of the chaos. "The sea tried to teach him manners," Tormund said, "and learned worse ones itself. We left him with a score on the shore because he said the sea could not have the last boast of his life. He will come when the boats go back. Or he will not. Either way, he will be Cotter Pike." He looked at John's face. "You look like the wind has told you it is your father." "Nothing so kind," John said. Then he heard the horn again. Once, then once, then once, no pattern he wanted. Men straightened in their sodden clothes like hounds lifting their heads. The 3rd ship was coming in with something wrong with its back. The deck lay at a tilt. A sailor was standing on the after rail with more stubbornness than skill, and between 2 heaps of bodies a woman screamed one long scream without pause, as if someone had placed a hand on her and stopped time there. Over the ship's side, where the water slapped, pale hands groped. They were made of meat and struggle. Then a different kind of hand came up, made of ice and patience, and found those pale fingers and held them. The sailor screamed then. "Fire," John said. The word had never been a prayer, not until now. "Bring torches. Pitch. Oil. Shoot anything that moves wrong. Shoot anything that moves right and then apologizes." He did not draw his sword because there was no place for a blade in this. He took a torch himself and felt the fire's heat lick his face as if he had been kissed by an enemy. Men balked once at setting fire to a ship any sane man would have wept to save. He made them do it. The flames crawled up the ship's sides as if tired. Then the wind remembered itself and made bellows. Ghost bristled and paced. The smell that rose tasted of tar and salt and the rot of the netherworld and of something like sweet meat spoiled under a summer's fly-hidden heat. The scream on the ship did not stop, not even when the flames climbed to her, not even then, and it turned into a part of the fire, a high knife that lay along the crackle. Some men looked as if they might break, so John spoke to them in the old voice that did not belong to a boy. "This is mercy," he said, not loudly, but the word leaped from one ear to another until it was the size of the yard. "You know it will return if we do not make it a story that ends here." The flames made a coffin of the ship, then a pyre, then a drift of embers, then nothing. The sea marked the place where the ship had been with a hissing like laughter. Tormund's hand came down on John's shoulder, and only then did John feel that his legs were shaking. "You were right to stay," Tormund said, while his breath made little ghosts between them. "Sometimes a man must be a mountain for other men to tie their ships to, and sometimes he must be a rock they break on. Today you were the first. Another day will come." Came quicker than a man's heart should have to tolerate. While they dragged dull-eyed salvaged souls into shelter, and while Yarwick sent men up ladders to unstop gutters already full of fresh snow, while Bowen Marsh counted the countable and added 5 numbers twice wrong, a boy with a chin like a cracked egg stood at the gate calling for the Lord Commander. He held out a packet tied with gut string. His mouth worked as if oily words had been put into it. "A man and a girl came to Eastwatch," he stammered. "They asked for the black. They said the wolves would eat them if they stayed. Cotter sent them by to you. He said if any of us could pull truth out of their mouths, it would be you." John stood very still. Ghost came up behind him and exhaled, and the boy jumped as if the ground had hissed at him. "Bring them," John said. "Bring them before the sun thinks about falling." The man had a smell of old iron and fear and something fouler that clung to him with the hold of a binding oath. His eyes kept darting to shadows. He stood too much on the balls of his feet, as if he had learned to make himself not fall when the ground went out from under him. The girl was all angles and bunched cloth and terror she did not know where to put. She flinched when Ghost sniffed her skirt. John looked at the man. The man looked back and then down, as if looking at John were like looking directly at a god he had angered. "Name yourself," John said. It took time before any sound came out of the man's throat. "Theon," he said, so softly the wind almost took it. Then, as if forced, "Greyjoy." A hiss went through the room. The Queen's men, who seemed always to be in any room now, made little movements like points made by lawyers. John saw the hand that had pushed the girl forward. It was more a thing from a midden than a hand, and yet the girl tried to find it again with her fingers when she lost it. That told John enough. That told him more than he could bear. "What is this girl to you?" John asked. "She is not who they say," Theon Greyjoy whispered. He swallowed and looked at the girl's face and then at his shoes. "I took her from them. That is what she is to me. A thing I did that is not a thing I had done before." He took a breath and it creaked. "She is not she is not Arya," the girl said, because she had learned a script and believed it to be the truth. She spoke the name as if it were a talisman to keep the fire from her. "Arya of..." John's body went somewhere else then. He stood and he was a child and he was a man. He stood before a lady whose hair had smelled of mother, and he stood before a banner embroidered with a direwolf who was his and was not allowed to be his. He took that breath into himself and let it go. "You are safe," he told the girl whose terror had made her a story. "Whatever your name is, you are safe here. The men who would take you will find their hands empty if they reach over our stones. And you," he said to Theon Greyjoy, "are a murderer and a betrayer and the author of a great deal of grief. You will speak. You will say everything you have to say. You may outlast winter telling it. If you want mercy, do not ask it of me. Ask it of the cold." The letter came again the day after. Threadbare rage pressed into wax and words. Named names. It listed demands. It swore, as men always swear, by gods who do not take such oaths very seriously. It said that it would come and take what it wanted. It said it had already taken. It said Stannis Baratheon burned like a log drowned in a snowmelt stream. It wanted Jon to ride. It wanted to open a wound that had never closed. John read it and folded it and set it on the table and put a stone on it. A black one from the lakeside north of Winterfell. He had once kept in a pocket because it fitted his hand. Bowen Marsh's eyes glittered. "Now," Bowen said, and his voice was nearly triumphant with horror. "Now you must see." "I see," John said. "I see a man who cannot climb our wall braying to make me throw a gate open with my own hands. I see my sister named. I see a girl who says that name and flinches. I see wildlings and brothers and queen's men and a giant who hardly fit in the door and a priestess with eyes that burn like the thing she prays to. And I see the gulf between what I want and what I swore, and I see the truth." He put his finger on the letter's wax and pressed. "There is nothing in here that will make me break what I am. If Winterfell is to be taken, it will not be by me. But there is another war. There is the only war. Bowen, take men and food to Greyguard. Othel, move the timber to Icemark whether your men curse or not. Leathers, build fires in the practice yard and put bows in the free folks' hands until their fingers remember that they are animals who learn to use their claws as tools. Tormund is not back yet," Tormund announced from the door, as if he might conjure himself. He came in trailing snow like a king trailing banners. "But he is too noisy to be kept out all the same. We brought you more than you asked for, Snow. We brought you bad dreams that breathe, and good ones that can't even remember how. We left some behind and burned the rest. The sea likes a good cook fire." He set a bag on the table, and bones clattered. No man in the room did not start a little. The bones were bad bones and old ones, blackened and wrong, sharded by heat into points that would prick the skin if a man were foolish enough to touch. Tormund snorted at their faces. "Don't worry, the dead aren't so quick to climb out of their own ashes. Not unless someone calls to them." Melisandre's mouth made a shape without sound. Then she said, "You will keep those out of my fire, and you keep your fire out of our bones." Tormund shot back. The quarrels were a mercy. They were the things of men. They were volley and argument and appetite. While men quarreled, John slept in 3 hours and walked in 21 and made maps with frostbitten fingers and ate what was put in front of him without asking whose hands had salted the pot. He stood with Shireen at the rookery and showed her how to wrap a bird in a cloth so that it did not peck her eyes. He stood with Theon Greyjoy in a small room where the wind got in through a crack no one could find and asked again and again for details until the details had a shape. He stood on the wall with Ghost until the world seemed all white and black and red and nothing in between. The Queen's men tried once to light a pyre in the yard. They chose a man with pockscars who had stolen bread and swore he did it with the devil's help and that the devil would be found in his ashes. One put his foot on the pyre wood, and the wood broke with a noise like ribs. Ser Patrek had to pretend that he had come to watch the wind, not to see a man burn. The look he gave John said that the story told in their tents that night would not be kind. John counted it a victory. On a day when the sky could not endure the weight of itself and lay low enough to touch a man's cap, the horn blew thrice in the middle of the noon meal, and men rose slow as dreamers to go to their station. John took Longclaw then, at last, and the weight fit his arm. Melisandre stood by the gate, and he did not want her there. But this was a place where once were deer that learned to freeze when the bow was drawn. The others did not march. They do not march. They come like weather. The men who claimed to have seen them on the Bight said that the air grew thin and brittle and the sound of the world went smaller. It did. The noise of the yard, of men making ready, buckles, curses, the clatter of the wheel that hauled ropes, the bark of orders, went away as if a hand had shut a door. The cold grew alive. Ghost's hair laid flat and bristled again like wheat under the wind. On the far side of the ice, faint as a memory, the snow moved against itself and rose and opened, and something there caught what little sun there was and turned it into a spear of light. John had seen an other once, in a shattered wood, and had felt the truth of that cold in his teeth and bones. He had cut one then, and it had come apart like glass with a toy sword hidden inside it. He had dreamed of it too many times to find any romance left in the telling. Now he put Longclaw's Valyrian steel to his shoulder and breathed, and the men around him breathed, and no one broke. That was the victory. No one broke. They came as if they were coming to visit, with the confidence of neighbors whose children had played in your yard all their lives. They did not run. They came down the slope and did not sink. Behind them were shapes moving not because they chose to move but because movement had been put back into them. The dead things would not fear the wall. They would not fear anything. They would only learn new jobs. "Loose," John said when the first line found the range. The arrows rattled and fled. Men had set the pitch to boiling, and now they tipped the cauldron and flung black flames that made the snow hiss and the other snow that had been men melt. The others moved a little then, not back but aside, with the smoothness of a knife finding a new path. Ghost growled and showed his teeth to the cold. John put the sight of one figure into his eye. Tall, thin as a lance with the waist burned out of it. Armor that looked like a frost that did not wet anything it touched. Eyes that would have made a child put his hands over his ears. "Hold," John said. Men held. Men shook and held. The axes in their hands weighed twice what they had weighed a minute ago, and the spears were hard to keep level, and the cold had fingers that put themselves down men's collars and did not take them away again. John had known cold before. He had not known this particular acquaintance, the kind where the air breathes for you and you find the breath in your lungs not yours. The first of the dead things reached the gate, and the flames ate it, and it walked through the flames with a new smell. It fell when a giant spear found it. One had a rock in one hand and a tree in the other, and he used both. The tree made a great arc over the yard like winter drawing a bridge, and when it came down it made splinters of everything beneath. Men cheered and heard themselves cheer and took strength from that sound that still belonged to them. Another came close. He did not climb. He stood and looked up at John as if studying an animal behind a fence. If there had been a word, it would have been contempt said in a language for which contempt was only a distraction. John felt the hatred inside himself rise and look around for a place to go and not find one. He did not aim. He leaped. His boots hit the ice on the inner step, and then Longclaw was in his hand and the world became a very small room with only two people in it, and one of them was not a person at all. He struck. He struck again. The sword bit and the thing broke. It came apart with a sound like a bell shattering. The cold screamed with the dead voice of the broken. The nearest dead fell and lay as if suddenly, embarrassed to be what they were. Again, John said, because there were more made like it, and he was not a hero, he was a machine made to say this one word until it meant nothing and everything. Afterward the wind shifted. It did not warm. It merely gave men air back that could be shared. Melisandre's mouth had blood on it, which might have been her own because the cold will do that to a nose. The giant bled, red as any story, from a dozen cuts that the dead had given him with their nails and teeth. They had not climbed the wall. They had wanted to see if they could make men flinch behind it. Some had flinched. Enough had not. Bowen Marsh leaned against a merlin as if he meant to become part of the stone, his eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. He looked at John across an arm's length of air and hatred and said, not quite in a whisper, "You have brought more of them to our gate with your kindness." John looked past him at the dead that lay, and at the women who wept and at the men who did not weep because they were too tired, and at Ghost, who stood on a heap of frozen meat and panted steam as if trying to turn winter into something else. He said, "I have brought what was already coming and given it something to do while we built ladders." Bowen's mouth pinched. If hatred had a measure, John could not have taken the reading now because he had no numbers left. That night, he slept in the armory because it was the only room that did not smell of too many people and too much loss. Ghost lay along his back, hot as life. In his sleep John went to Winterfell. The great hall was heavy with banners and the smell of baked apples. His father stood there, making faces to make Arya laugh. The faces kept breaking and falling and shattering like glass on a stone floor, and each time they fell John heard the sound of Valyrian steel cutting ice. He rose shaking and went to the ramparts and watched the stars try to be seen through the snow and then give up. What broke the second trouble was not the dead, but the living. The Queen's men came into the yard at noon in a clump that told the world they thought themselves a sword. Queen Celis stood at the back with a face like a cloth that had not yet learned how to take creases. "The girl is mine," she said, without raising her voice, and the yard heard. "She is the key to a promise made at Winterfell." You will give her to me." Theon Greyjoy made a noise like a hare cornered by hounds. Jon had never liked the man, had liked him even when he had, the way men like a song that is bad in a familiar way, but now he had a moment where he would have placed himself between Theon and a cliff. That moment passed. He put himself between the queen and the girl instead. "She is under the protection of the Night's Watch," he said. "She has sworn no vows to any of you. She eats our food and sleeps under our roof, and she is terrified. The Watch does not hand over refugees to people who speak about keys and promises."
Se patraxmout tinat.
"Your oath says you take no part in the quarrels of kings and queens. This is a quarrel of kings and queens." "My oath commands I defend the realms of men," Jon said. "I find that there is a realm under my roof, and that someone would breach it. No one will be burned here who does not put a torch to himself. No one will be taken who does not choose to leave. If her grace would speak to the girl, she may do so with 2 brothers of the Watch at either shoulder and my wolf under the table." One came then, because the yard had a taste of blood in it, and giants, like wolves, do not ignore such flavors. He set himself behind Jon with a gentleness that would have been comic on another day. His presence tilted the argument the way a big wind tilts a small tree. Men did not say the things they had come to say. The queen looked at the giant's fingers and at the graves he could dig without tools and gave a smile that was like the shadow of a knife on silk. "We will speak," she said. "We will see if the girl remembers names." She did not get the chance. For once, fate took a hand with a sense of timing. The gates banged, and in came a man with a beard full of snow and a raven on his shoulder who had leased him for this moment. He knelt before Jon and held up a letter sealed in heavy blue wax. Jon broke it while everyone watched him. The words were written in a cramped hand that hurried. A frozen river, a castle of logs, a king who would not die because he preferred to be stubborn, a fight not yet fought, men who needed food and not prayers. Stannis had not burned. He had not won either. Jon read it again with his finger and gave it to Bowen Marsh. Bowen's eyes narrowed, then lifted to Jon's with a look that accused him of having conjured the letter out of his own will. "We cannot aid him," Bowen said. "If we sent food or men, we would take a side." "We can send words," Jon said. "We can send the truth of the ground and the weather. We can advise him of what is moving along the shore. We can tell him not to waste men he cannot afford. We can tell him to stay in one place and make the ground defend him rather than wandering like a stag all over the snow for hounds to run down." "Words," Bowen sneered. "Words have put men in the ground faster than steel," Jon said. "We will use both when we must, in their proper order." Tormund grinned. "You want me to go whisper at a king? I whisper louder than most men shout." His grin faded when he saw Theon. "I have whispered to worse. If I bring back word, will you pay me?" "I will pay you in food and fires," Jon said. "And a place for your people to sleep that is not a ditch." "Done," Tormund said and spat again, and again the spit froze before it sank. "I'll bring the king a joke. He looks like a man who could use one." The joke took 2 weeks to travel and came back without a punchline. There were more living with Stannis than Jon had expected and fewer than a man would want. They had wood to burn because the Crofters' village had wood and men who knew what to do with it. They had meat because the woods still had game that had not learned yet to fear men who smelled of smoke and desperation. They had no joy. Tormund came back with his beard singed, which meant he had leaned too close to a fire while laughing. He came back with no news a man could sing about. The queen's face grew a new set of lines. Melisandre sat in her tower and watched flames until her eyes looked like coals taken too quickly from a hearth. What saved them from one another in those days was work. They strung a long black line of men on the top of the wall with bows and with horns and with nothing to do but watch and learn the difference between moving shadow and moving death. They opened Icemark and they slept their six to a room and told lies about women to keep the cold from noticing their feet. They drilled and made of the yard a machine, and when the machine choked they spat and pushed and it went on again. They were not ready for what was coming. They could not be, but they were more ready than they had been when the pink letter first came, and that made Jon afraid in a new way because it gave him hope, and hope is the kind of guest that eats half your bread and then complains about the rest. The day the axe fell was ordinary. It had to be. No man ever chooses the day the accident happens. Bowen Marsh came to John in the shade of the barracks with something like a decision dressed up as courtesy. "I would like," he said, with the air of a man who had rehearsed in front of a mirror while his breath made frost on the glass, "to be sent to Greyguard. It needs a steady hand. And a loyal one. It needs someone who can count twice and be right both times," John said. He felt the shackles drop off his ankles. "Take whomever you choose. Leave us the best, though. Leave us always the best, Bowen." Bowen flinched at the appeal to duty, the way a man flinches when a dog that has bitten him tries to lick his hand. He left. The air warmed a degree without him. That was unfair, John knew, and likely mad, but still it felt true. The night after, Theon Greyjoy tried to hang himself with a rope made of strips from his own cloak. It was not pity that made John cut him down. It was rage. Rage that the man would try to take mercy out of John's hands and give it back to his gods without asking. He spoke to Theon in a voice he did not like hearing in his own mouth. "You will not make a decision for me," he said. "You took choices from people and set them on fire. You will not take mine now. You will live until I say you are done. That is your penance." Theon wept and hated and slept. He did not thank John. He did not need to. A raven came in the night from Eastwatch, and it brought a lock of hair in its claws and a note pinned with a fishbone. Cotter Pike had written it. He said, "Water colder than knives, a wind that set teeth in men's gums, a night when the stars fell out of the sky with no sound, a morning when the sea hung on the stones and would not wash off." He said, "Something moving under the ice." He said, "If the wall should happen to be manned when it is needed, it would be good." John did not sleep. He went up the steps and put his hand on the ice and spoke to it in his head. He told it what he would do. He told it of a boy who had not been allowed to use his father's name and who had learned to make other names. He told it of girls running in the yard. He told it of knives in the dark that had not found his skin yet and of a future in which those knives might rust still wanting. The wall did not answer. He had not expected it to. When dawn broke with a sound like thick ice cracking on a pond and made the yard ring and made men throw their arms around themselves and curse, Ghost raised his ears and went stiff. John listened. It was not the dead. It was voices. Not in the yard. In the tower. A fight had started in a place that should have been quieter than anywhere, and it had started with insults and then a shove and then Steele trying to remember it was not allowed. He took the steps 3 at a time with Longclaw drawn and wished in a childish place that he had had a father to tell him this would be easy. He came into the corridor and saw a queen's man with a knife raised and a steward with his hands up in blood that had made a map across the stone like the Bay of Seals, and behind them one, eyes wild. Ser Patrek had come again with his blue cloak and his stars. He had thought to force the question of the girl. He had thought to take what a queen desired with a quiet knife. One had taken him up like a child and shaken him again because giants learn faster than men too. And this time when he set the knight down, he set him down wrong. The knight's head hit the stone with a sound like a melon dropped by a careless cook. That ended half a war. John raised his sword and did not swing. He said, "Put your knives away. Whoever draws steel against a brother of the watch under my roof answers to me and to me alone." His voice was a thing he knew how to use. Men lowered knives because the voice told them they would be ashamed later if they did not. The queen's men retreated, all edges and heat. The steward bled and tried to keep his bowels in with one shaking hand. John called for cloth and a needle that would not break and found both. He put his hand on one's forearm and felt the tremble of a creature made for hills and earth kept too long on stone. "We will build you a barn," he said. "An honest barn with honest hay. We will put you where men will have to come find you if they want to meddle. One no want hurt. Jon Snow," the giant said in words that scuffed folk who had never heard them before. "I know," Jon said. "That's why I keep you near, else I might forget what gentle is." He did not forget. He did not forget when the next raven brought news out of the snow that might as well have been a lie. A half victory for a half king. A cold camp full of men who had not yet died and did not yet know whether they would. A banner that had not fallen because the pole had frozen to the man's hand. He did not forget when Tormund came back with a girl on his shoulders who sang because they had told her to sing to keep the dead from hearing her breath. He did not forget when Bowen Marsh wrote like an accountant about walls that did not stop drafts and men who did not stop themselves from stealing an extra fist of oats. He did not forget when Ghost, in the night, lifted his head and howled, and the sound went away down the wall like a command. Men woke and were at their posts before they knew why they had woken. Jon went and stood at the highest place he could find and looked until his eyes felt like stones. He could not see the thing that drew the howl out of Ghost, but he could feel the shape of it in the emptiness that the night left. Sometimes the danger is not the thing. It is the shadow where the thing will be. Months wear men down. The work built a rhythm that was like the sea. The stories became fewer because men had told them too often. The food was measured in handfuls and the hope in breaths. Jon paid out his choices carefully, as if each were a coin that he could prove he had had. And there came a morning when the yard had the sound of something else. The thing called readiness that no one recognizes until it is too late to do anything with it. The letters from the south grew stranger while the cold grew ordinary. A king's head on a spike that might have been anyone's. A queen burned in effigy so often that woodcutters began to tell those who ordered the effigies to go cut their own trees. A river that had taken back a bridge men had sworn would outlast them. None of it mattered. The board of the world had tilted. All the pieces slid to this long white table where Jon sat and counted bowls. The day the dead truly came in force was not the day he had dreaded. It had its own taste. It came with a wind that did not belong to this world, and with a snow that fell upward for a while, and with a sound like a harp made of glass being played with gloves of smoke. They came in a line this time, patient and measured, and they brought with them a silence that made the men's hearts beat too loud. The line moved forward and then back and then sideways. It did not spread out. It didn't need to. It wanted to find one weakness and burrow there. Jon had moved men like pieces on a board he had found in his father's solar all those years ago, the one with the little carved stags and wolves and lions. He had not been the best player in the world. Robb had beaten him because Robb could imagine 3 moves at once without asking what he wanted from any of them. Jon had learned to be dogged and to take small victories like breadcrumbs along a night path. He moved men now, and the men moved willingly. They went where he set them, and they did not argue. There is a fear that makes men quarrel, and there is a fear that makes them docile. He preferred the first, but he took the second. The first ranks of the dead met the fire and put it out. The second ranks met the iron and took it in and gave it back. The third ranks met 1-1 and had nothing to say. The others moved behind, colder than rage and with better manners. One stepped forward with a spear whose head was not steel. Jon stepped to meet him. He did not look left or right. He put the sword where it needed to be, and his arms knew what to do, and the sword sang the song it sang when it was used for the work it had been made for. An ugly song, the only one that mattered. The other broke with the proper sound. The world screamed with it, and the line wavered. On the wall above, horns blew until men's lips bled. The queen's men stood with black brothers, and both used pikes without being asked. And afterward many would say they had not noticed their hands reaching together for the same spare shaft when one broke. Melisandre's voice went up and up until it burned out, and then she lowered it and said a thing in a language that made 2 men fall to their knees and another vomit. The flames obeyed her once and then not again. She looked older afterward. The red of her hair seemed borrowed. When it was done, the yard looked like a butcher's on a day when the noblemen have all decided they like meat. The dead lay in pieces and the pieces lay in piles, and the piles were still, and men limped among them and tried not to look at their feet. Jon's arm hung tired as if someone else had been using it. He found Ghost and ran a hand along the wolf's muzzle and found there a cut that would have been deep on a man and was shallow on a creature built by another logic. Ghost leaned his weight into Jon like a promise kept. Bowen Marsh came out of the smoke. He had blood on his face that was not his. He looked around as if counting had become a habit that he could not break. And then he met Jon's eyes, and in that instant Jon knew a thing. The knifing in the dark that had waited in these halls had passed. They had all been forced to use their knives in the day. The knives had tasted something other than the cheap triumph of treachery. It would not make friends of them. It would not make Bowen Marsh sleep easier when he thought of the word wildling lying under his roof. But it had moved something. "You did not ride south," Bowen said, as if admitting a fact he had once argued against. "You did not ride south, and you did not let the sea swallow us." "I did not," John said. He did not smile. He did not feel the height to smile. Bowen nodded, a spasm more than a gesture, and walked away. When he next slept, John dreamt of Winterfell again. But this time the hall was cold and empty save for a wolf at each corner and the sound of water far below the stones. He walked there in his dream and left no footprints. He saw again the work that had made him, indeed the work he had made. He woke with tears frozen along his jawline and did not wipe them away. In the morning, the pink letter lay under the stone by chance as he reached for a charcoal nub to add a line to Othel's map of cracks. He lifted the stone and read again the clumsy threats, the names of children betrayed into ink. He took the letter and fed it to the fire that had warmed his hands an hour. It did not burn quickly. Ill-made paper is slow to catch. He watched until it was ash. He did not feel triumphant. One small story had ended without singing. The bigger story would go on until it had eaten everyone who could be eaten, and then it would eat itself. He went out into the yard and stood with the men and then climbed to the wall and walked its back with Ghost and listened to the ice listen to the world. In the far east, the sky had a color that was not yet dawn. It would come. He would be there when it did, with a sword that had done what it was asked and with a heart that had learned to bear what it had to bear. He was Lord Commander of a piece of ice and men and lies and steel and hunger. He would remain. He would not ride south. He would not die secretly and be reborn to a story. He would stand here and he would lose and he would win and he would stand. The wall kept its own counsel. The wind bit. Ghost's breath plumed and vanished. In the silence between horn calls, a man's heart could hear itself and know that it was not alone.